Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming to today's program. My name is Joy Yamaguchi. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at JANM, and on behalf of the museum, I want to thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to join us for this wonderful program on this exciting new graphic novel, We Hereby Refuse. So today we are going to be talking about We Hereby Refuse, a new graphic novel by, I'm going to pull this up to make sure I have everything right. We're going to talk about We Hereby Refuse, a new graphic novel. Our authors are Frank Abe, Tamiko Nimura, and Ross Ishikawa, as well as Matt Sasaki, our illustrators. So it's a really wonderful book. You can buy it today from the JANM store, link in the bio. Definitely make sure to get your hands on the copy sooner rather than later before we sell out. There will be more copies coming into the store, but not until after the 4th of July, I believe. So definitely, if you want to get your hands on it, purchase it now. And I see we're already getting comments that it's an excellent graphic novel, and I definitely agree. I also want to say a thank you. Our program today is sponsored by the George and Sake Aratani Care Award, UCLA's Asian American Studies Center, and the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience. So a special thank you to all of their support in the making this graphic novel happen and also making this program today happen. So with that, I'm going to introduce today's moderator. We are so lucky to have Dr. Kelly Fong, who is a 5th-generation Chinese-American historical archaeologist and Asian American Studies scholar. She is currently a lecturer in Asian American Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, and I'm going to hand the program over to Dr. Kelly Fong. So thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this amazing panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by introducing our panelists for today. And so let's just jump right into it. So first I want to introduce Frank Abe. Frank Abe wrote and directed the PBS film on the largest organized resistance to incarceration, Conscious in the Constitution. He won an American Book Award for John Okada, the life of and rediscovered work of the author of No No Boy, and is co-editing a new anthology on the incarceration literature for Penguin Classics. He blogs at resistors.com. Tamiko Nimura is an Asian American Sansei Pinay, a writer living in Tacoma. Her training is in community journalism, literature, and American ethnic studies, where she earned a master's and a PhD at the University of Washington, which prepared her to research, document, and tell the stories of people of color. And she can be found at tamikonomura.net. As far as our illustrators go, Ross Ishikawa is a cartoonist and animator living in Seattle, and he is working on a graphic novel about his parents and their coming of age during World War II. His work is online at rossishikawa.com. And the other illustrator, Matt Sasaki, is unable to join us today, but he is the artist on a previous volume in the series, Fighting for America and Issei Soldiers. And so what we're going to do is we're first going to have a sort of discussion about the book, and then I'm going to introduce our visitors from the YURI Education Project are going to talk about the curriculum that go with the book. And then we're going to have some sort of discussion, right, where I've posed some questions, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started with the first section. So I'm going to start sharing my screen really quick, and then we are going to start off with Frank. So give me a minute to share screen.
And while Kelly's sharing her screen, I just wanted to thank JANM for its support of all aspects of the Japanese American experience, including that of the camp resistance. They don't have to be inclusive, but they are. So if any viewers aren't already members of JANM yet, now's a good time to join or renew.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Frank, why don't you start by telling us a bit about how the novel or graphic novel came to be?
Well, we call this the story of camp as you've never seen it before. And there's a couple reasons for that. Just the idea that there was resistance to the camps is something that has only been talked about in the Japanese American community in the last 20 years. I was among those who recovered this particular story, along with the Omori sisters and Eric Muller around 2000. So before that, it was accepted that the Japanese American response to the massive violation of constitutional rights in the American 20th century could be summed up in one of two Japanese terms: shikatakanai, Japanese for, it can't be helped, passive resignation to injustice, or go for broke, a Hawaiian pidgin for patriotic self-sacrifice and the spilling of blood to prove one's loyalty to America. Those two polar opposites never rang true for me, so I've been glad to help develop and deliver the story of a third thing, and that was the camp resistance. Our book is also different from others you read before, that they convey what I call a victim narrative. They're told from the point of view often of children in camp. Children don't understand what's going on around them, why they're locked up, or why the grown-ups are always fighting. So they only react to the physical environment, hot weather or the bad food. Our story is told by, as you see in a second, three characters in their early 20s. So they have agency. They must make choices about every decision demanded of them by the government. And we weave these three characters into a single timeline to create the effect of an epic narrative of the entire camp experience. Jim Akutsu here refuses to be drafted from the camp at Minidoka. He tried to enlist before and after Pearl Harbor, but rejected for flat feet. His father is separated from the family by his arrest by the FBI and sent to a DOJ alien internment camp, Montana. His family loses their home they own in Seattle and their shoe repair business after investing in new machinery. And then after 2 years of this, he's given a draft notice, and he says, no, I didn't get due process when you put me here. A fair hearing is what I want. I want my day in court. Second character is Hiroshi Kashiwagi and his family, who were removed from their farm outside Sacramento, sent to Tule Lake when it was just another relocation camp. Once there, he refuses the government pressure to sign the loyalty oath, which I'll get more into a second. And he's threatened with prison time and hefty fines until under duress he signs no and no. They remain at Tule Lake when it's fortified as the WRA's segregation camp. Then Hiroshi caves to family pressure to renounce his U.S. citizenship and avoids being deported only after enlisting the aid of attorney Wayne Collins. By contrast, Mitsuye Endo's story is more straightforward. I mean, she's a reluctant recruit to a lawsuit contesting her imprisonment. The WRA offers her a chance to leave camp alone if she drops her case. So instead of choosing her own freedom, Mitsuye Endo decides to stay in camp for 2 more years in order for her case to reach the Supreme Court, where her victory, once there, forces the government to shut down the camps for everyone. Now, educators have said they really appreciate having the story of a strong woman to teach. So here with Mitsuye Endo, we're introduced to a new story that can teach of a woman with agency in the incarceration story. And Kelly, this is the scene of Mitsuye Endo declining the government's offer of freedom. I am willing to go as far as I can on this case. That's her big turning point, her decision point. If you go to the next slide, Kelly, we also devote 3 pages to the immigrant mothers in camp. Again, well, on the idea of showing strong women in this camp story. They organize a letter writing campaign to demand restoration of full citizenship rights to their precious sons before they're sent off to the front to fight and possibly die. So this letter on the right, Dear President Roosevelt, is actually drawn from a letter donated to JANM, written about by Karen Ishizuka, and Mira Shimabukuro of the University of Washington here researched the background of this letter and the Mother Society and published this story in her own groundbreaking book called Relocating Authority. Finally, once we get all these characters in place, we realize you can't talk about resistance without seeing what they were resisting against. So we needed to show the antagonists who drive the actions that divide the people in camp. So there's a 4th character, if you will, the US government, and our own Japanese American leaders who were embraced by the government as their liaison to the community. Here's Colonel Bendetson bringing in wartime leader Mike Masaoka and Saab Kido to a meeting in the Presidio in San Francisco, where he says, look, this mass removal is going to happen. And we'd like you to get your people to cooperate. So we can do this the easy way or the army way. And whether he was bluffing or not, it worked on Masaoka. This drawing shows what he actually talked about Masaoka well into the 1980s. I can still hear Mike's voice telling people, do you want people murdered in the streets? Do you want tanks to come in and destroy the little ghettos that we have enjoyed? I think we had no alternative. So with the graphic novel, we can show you people's thoughts in a more vivid fashion than you get from, an academic book. And also, we were showing you earlier that scene is a private conversation. And while we don't know exactly what was said in these private conversations like these, we made every effort in this script to draw the words from the historical record so that every line, every scene, every situation is true to character and to the historical situation.
Yeah, I also noticed that reading the book that the quotes that you normally see in textbooks and whatnot are really coming to life, right, in a different way through the graphic novel. So you mentioned that you were one of the things that you do is like working on reframing the narrative about incarceration. And so can you let us know how that really applies to the notorious questionnaire asked of incarcerees to swear their loyalty to the United States?
Well, that's a good question, Kelly, because this is one of our chapter titles, which you can see shows the kind of flipping the loyalty question on its head. So the JCL effectively waived the right of Japanese Americans to protest exclusion. So there was no resistance to the actual eviction. The first mass resistance to incarceration does not emerge until 10 months later when the government distributes its loyalty questionnaire in February of 43. And so it's the country that's loyal to us. In most texts, Kelly, this is the chapter with the questionnaire usually called A Question of Loyalty, which our book rejects that framing because a question of loyalty, open-ended, places the onus, I think, on the incarcerees, on the victims. So no, we flip that on its head. It's the country. And as several Kibe said at the time, it's not a question of our loyalty. It's the country that's not loyal to us, to its own principles, to the Constitution, not loyal to the Constitution. So administering a loyalty questionnaire after the fact, after you've taken fathers from their families, after you've taken their homes, livelihoods, and freedoms, this was more of a classic bureaucratic bungle between two government agencies, one military, one civilian. Next slide shows first the Army having effectively branded the Japanese Americans as potential spies and saboteurs by locking them up in these camps. They needed a way, the Army did, to clear volunteers for the Army as eligible for service. And by the same token, on the right side, you see the Civilian War Relocation Authority needed a way to clear the Nisei for resettlement to schools and jobs in the Eastern Midwest. So they needed, effectively, they mounted a reverse PR campaign. And they came up with what for them was as a bureaucracy, it's a perfect paper trail, a loyalty questionnaire, a loyalty oath. The Army and WRA, and this is a meeting between John J. McCloy of the Department of War and Dylan Meyer. They come up with this, to combine their questions into one form. Question 27 is for the Army, 28 is a simple oath of allegiance. We can piggyback on this form. And Dylan Meyer says, I can distribute this for you in our 10 camps. And they figured no one would have any problems with this. Well, of course, the problem was even the government, no one had a clear idea how the answers to this questionnaire, this loyalty oath, would be used. And with a complete failure to provide Army recruiters with a simple FAQ, all the application for leave clearance did was create an administrative class of people who on paper had to be categorized by the government as not loyal when they refused to answer, are you loyal? This is a scene at Tule Lake, drawn by Matt Sasaki. And this is a scene that's witnessed by Hiroshi Kashiwagi in our book, protesting, how are you going to use these answers? So remember, Kelly, these people have committed no acts of disloyalty. Hiroshi Kashiwagi at first simply refused to answer the questionnaire. It was only when he was threatened with 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine that he changed his answer to no and no under duress on this poorly understood questionnaire for which, again, no one has any idea of the consequences. So the point the book makes is it's the government that creates a class of disloyals, not the incarcerees, through a purely administrative act. I'm glad you agree with me on this. I can see you nodding. So it's only disloyalty on paper, not by action. And as the lawyers will tell you, you can't be prosecuted for your thoughts, only for your deeds. Public opinion is a different matter, though. So Congress demands the WRA separate the yeses from the nos. Again, this is all on paper. And the agency obliges, Dylan Meyer obliges by fortifying Tule Lake. He picks one of the 10 camps, it's Tule Lake, as its segregation center, a kind of prison colony. And then he moves in the 12,000 from the other camps who refused to answer or answered no. Now, none of this was expected. I mean, no one expected this who answered no, this would happen. This was a consequence of the binary nature of the question yes or no in a questionnaire. So again, the subtext of this section of the book is it's the government that creates the conditions for unrest, for resegregation, for demands for repatriation to Japan, expatriation, denationalization, renunciation, and ultimately deportation, which we spell out in detail in the narrative of the story through Hiroshi Kashiwagi.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the argument that you're making here, and just like how these folks are operating under certain conditions that the government is controlling, right, in this case. And so those actions and decisions that people make, right, are within that particular context.
I'm glad to present this to a JANM audience, because the point I want to make, which is a little hard to take sometimes, is that the government creates these divisions in our community, but it's our own people who embrace these divisions and made them our own. So that to this day, there are, for example, you say veterans who will not speak to, their neighbor or their fellow church congregation member who refused a questionnaire, who's a no-no or a draft resistor. Our community has kept alive these divisions. We call it a divided community because we embraced what the government did to us. And I think that one of the objects of this book is to undo some of that damage and by seeing it dramatically, seeing it and understanding it so we can, expunge it.
And so, Frank, I know, you have a large body of work, right, that is talking about resistance, and then you've made a film, right, about camp resistance. And so, can you explain a little bit about why doing these particular stories through the form of a graphic novel?
Yeah, I wish it was a great idea that we had to team up and do this, but it was the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle had a vision. They got a grant, National Park Service, to create a series of 3 graphic novels. First, Nisei Soldiers, second, Camp Resistance, and the third forthcoming is White Allies, Hakuchin Allies of the Incarcerees. So I appreciate the Wing Luke had that. Their mission is to connect everyone to Asian American history through vivid storytelling. And they grasp the power of the graphic novel to bring together art and history for readers of all ages. And with a graphic novel, you can immerse yourself in the personal stories in a way that generates empathy. So this was a natural partnership for us, and we put out a call for proposals for writers and artists, and the 4 of us answered the call. I do want to say that, empathy, the graphic novel, by creating empathy, is something that is so much needed now in 2021, in a year when we have, anti-Asian violence and people feeling free to kick and punch Asian Americans on the street. So works like these, I'm so glad the state of California adopted an ethnic studies requirement, right? I've heard about that, so that we get more books like ours and others into the classroom and create the kind of empathy that will take years to build in the younger generation of students.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I teach in Asian American studies. You don't have to convince me why ethnic studies is important. As we're getting into talking about empathy, let's dive a little bit deeper into one of our characters. And so, Tamiko, I hear you have a family connection to one of the main characters that is profiled in the book. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. This is a picture of my uncle, Hiroshi Kashiwagi, who I'm sure many of you know in the audience. My auntie Sadako and his 2 sons, Soji and Hiroshi F. Kashiwagi, are here on the call, and I'm so glad they're here. My uncle was a Nisei poet, playwright, actor, activist, and he passed in 2019. So before we could show him the final product, but we had conversations with him about his experience. This particular photo of him in camp in his Argyle sweater in the snow on the right-hand side there is one of the reference photos that we were able to use for the graphic novel. As you can see here, Matt used this particular perspective with his kind of hands in his pockets and watching and observing. So we wanted to show you a bit of that. A lot of this is the work of Matt Sasaki. I worked with my uncle on 2 of his books, his first 2, Swimming in the American with a blurb from George Takei of JANM, and Shoebox Plays, which is a collection of plays that were literally in the shoebox for decades. And so I knew my uncle's story pretty well, but to write his story, Frank and I collaborated using both our personal knowledge of his character, my uncle's published writings, recorded interviews, and his poetry and plays. And honestly, I think his poetry and plays are where a lot of his really deep emotional truths lie. So we were able to draw from a variety of sources to tell his story.
No, I think it's really great how you're able to draw upon his own work, right? To tell his story of resistance, right? There's another character that has one of the sort of moments in the graphic novel that a lot of readers have noticed and commented about, and that's actually the moment of Mitsuye Endo finding out of her unanimous Supreme Court victory. And so I was wondering if you could walk us through a little bit of the process about bringing this scene to life.
Absolutely. This is the famous photograph that people might know of Mitsuye Endo at Topaz. And so Frank gave us the larger picture, right, of the graphic novel, but I wanted to show you all just some of the work that went into just one scene for this particular book. Lots of deep historical research, certainly Frank's decades of knowledge and work on the camps and resistance. I've been reading about and learning about camp since I was a little girl and have learned and continue to learn about it while working on this. So there was a lot that I didn't know about Mitsuye Endo, and I think a lot of us didn't know very much about Mitsuye Endo, quite honestly. She really kept quite silent about her case. She didn't testify during redress, and I had not really heard of her very much when I came to write this book. And when Frank had presented us with his proposal about the kinds of characters or people that we might feature in the book, Mitsuye Endo's name certainly stood out to me. So I went to the Densho Encyclopedia, and in the bibliography for the Densho Encyclopedia on her case, there was an academic journal article published in 2011 by Alyssa Uchida called Nisei Employees versus the California State Personnel Board, a journal of ex parte Endo, 1942 to 47. And it's a long article about Endo's case, as well as the larger case that she was a part of with the California State employees. And it was told a lot through the eyes of her best friend at the time, who went by Janet Masuda. So there were lots of really fascinating moments in that article, but there is this moment that just really pulled on me and just wouldn't let me go. Here's the moment. When the exclusion order was lifted on December 17th, I knew we had won our case. And a couple of days later, when Mitsuye Endo, she lives in the next block, came running with a telegram from you confirming my belief, we were so happy that we actually danced around the room. This is from Janet Masuda to Endo's attorney, James Purcell. So in the next slide, you can actually see how Ross took that moment. So in between that particular moment of research, that little note, that paragraph, there were lots of character arcs, story arcs, scripts, impaneled scripts, and then something that Ross could actually draw from here with the Topaz Post Office. You can see how Ross really took advantage of the time that graphic novels have to linger in the drama a bit, to show a bit of reaction. The reference photo on the right-hand side is from a Dave Hatsuno film showing what the Topaz Post Office looked like. So Ross was able to draw from that. And the next slide will show us the telegram that Endo sent to Purcell when she heard the news. And I found this in the California State Archives, a folder of correspondence between Endo and her lawyer, Purcell. And you can see in that very short message that she sent to Purcell that same joy that Janet Masuda described about them dancing around the barrack, right? I'm extremely joyous of results. Appreciate very much your long effort in restoring our rights. And in the next slide, you can see how Ross dramatized the dancing around the barrack and the telegram that we actually had. Correcting the typo, I assume, in Mitsuye Endo's name, but took great care to reproduce what would the machine look like, what would the telegram look like, and so that gives you all a sense of just the deep dive that we had to do in order to make sure that this was as historically accurate as possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, again, thinking about when I teach Introduction to American History, talking about how, primary sources are important, but also just, I've been, telling students about the power of artistic expression, right? And thinking about this graphic novel as a way to talk about that deep research, right? That can be used through the medium of art, right? And graphic novel to tell these stories. And so I think this moment of Endo, right, is something that's, I definitely didn't know. And so I'm hoping that a lot of our readers are really finding the joy in these moments as well. Right. So I actually now want to transition to talking a bit with Ross. And so in addition to the archival research that Frank and Tamiko were doing for the, writing the story, Ross, I want you to walk us through a little bit about the research you did to create the artwork.
Sure. A lot of the artwork was based on photographs in Frank and Tamiko's collection. Frank has 40 years of being steeped in this topic, and many contacts. And so, like this photo, for instance, is a shot of Mitsuye Endo's actual block that she lived on in Sacramento. With a notice, poster on it. And so I would take those kinds of photographs and then put them in the context of Frank really wanted to see that house in relationship to the state capitol, because it was really, within a mile or mile and a half of the capitol. And so I just went to Google Earth and took a screenshot to just basically get the basic layout of that block, which is now a parking lot and office buildings. So that the whole neighborhood is pretty much gone except for that one particular house. But that led to the final product, which was showing the house with the Capitol behind. And this was a scene where they were packing up to go to camp. So it was a challenge to put all these pieces together, but it was great to have all these pieces to put together. So there were very few scenes that weren't based on actual found footage. As Tamiko had mentioned in her portion, Dave Tatsuno's video or a whole movie was a great resource. It's on YouTube, and it was just his home movies from camp. And from that, as Tamiko had mentioned, that's where I could get actual colors of the camp. And go to the next slide. You can see that the color is actually based on that. But I also wanted an aerial shot of the camp, and wouldn't you know, Dave actually climbed up on a roof so he could get an aerial shot of the camp. So that was just what I needed for that scene, to show her running within the context of the camp. This shows a newspaper photo when the Issei fathers were rounded up shortly after Pearl Harbor, and sent to places where to prison. And it was the mothers and families saying goodbye. And that was a very powerful scene, and it was just great to have the actual location and context to build the scene on the left, to just show the emotion and the power of just all these families having to say goodbye to their fathers and husbands. But there are other sources. This is a prison ferry that Jim Akutsu took to prison. And for this scene, I wanted to get, an accurate depiction of the prison ferry. And there I happened upon a great website that was totally devoted to the ferry history of the Pacific Northwest and actually of the West Coast. And reached out to the proprietor of that site, and he did a little bit of footwork and tracked down this photograph, which was an actual prison ferry of the time. And so that was just a nice little find to just add a little bit of realism to that portion of the scene. And then another source were artists that were in camp, and that was very helpful because it really brought home the emotion and of the time. And so I stole liberally from Eddie Kurishima and Jean Sugioka for these scenes to really get a sense of both the setting and just sort of the positioning of what was going on in these scenes.
Yeah, I see the historic, that reconstruction and the detail, right, that you put into doing the research and finding the images and situating it so that it's, fit those archival images and stories, right, that the people were telling. And so in addition to doing, locating these sources, I understand that you use computer aided design to help create some of the scenes. So can you explain to us a bit about how that worked?
Sure. I was an architect for about 20 years, and during that time I used a program called SketchUp that it had this great feature where you could take a photograph, draw in the vanishing lines and of a building, and it would actually put a 3D grid with the same vanishing points and orientation of the photograph. And so from that, if you go to the next slide, I could construct the actual model of the camp. And this model was built from a number of photographs. There were quite a few photographs of the camp that I could piece together, but none of them were of the scenes that I actually needed, but they were really useful to set up, where the barracks were relative to the horse stables or the bandstand or all that stuff. So if you go to the next scene, you could see I was able to reconstruct the roller coaster. That was something I wanted as part of it, to show that they're being herded into this fairground, And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there was an aerial shot of the whole camp, and that was very useful just to get a bearing. It was useful for me to get a bearing as to how the different scenes related to each other. Also, on a side note, there was never confirmation that there were guard towers at this Puyallup camp. And through this process, I found this photograph, this aerial photograph, and you can see in the side block of barracks, there are two little guard towers there, and then they're also on the other side block. And that was the first real evidence I could find of photographic evidence of towers, which is something I wanted to set up for other reasons in the scene. And there you could see the reconstruction of the camp model, which I could then use, for scenes in the cafeteria and just everything, and the arrival of the camp. And if you go to the
towers, right? The towers right here.
Yeah, right. So when there's a scene in the book where the bus leaves Seattle, and you can see it, the towers of Seattle through the bus windows, and then in the next frame, they've arrived at camp, and those towers are replaced with these guard towers. But I wanted to make sure that the guard towers actually existed, and so that was a nice little discovery. And so I also but another real challenging spot was a shoe repair shop that was owned by the Akutsus, one of the characters' families in the book, and that's now a park. And right at the base of that arch is where the shoe shop was. And Seattle has had a great thing. I think it was a WWII project where the city assessor went around the city and took photographs of every block in the city. Unfortunately, the blocks that had the shoe shop in it, those photographs haven't survived for some reason. So this was the closest photograph I could find. And it was around the block, unfortunately. We thought it was the right one, but it was actually around the block, and it wasn't the right spot. But there's a great resource. Another resource is called Densho Digital Repository, and Densho is just a wonderful organization. Oral histories and photographs of the Japanese and American experience during World War II. And lo and behold, after actually weeks and weeks of looking, I found this on their repository. Somebody had gone around and taken photos similar to the city, and lo and behold, here was the shop, and you can even see the sign of this shoe repair sign, which is better than I ever could have imagined. It was just such a great evocative sign of the time. So from that, I could use the 3D modeling to reconstruct a 3D model. And then from that, I could reorient and get just the angle I wanted for the cover of the book, which I believe is the next slide. Yeah, here you can see the angle that I took, and then the final cover on the right. I particularly wanted this angle because I wanted to see the hospital up on the hill in the background, because that hospital plays a key point in this particular story. And so with this tool, I was able to do that, but also being accurate to the historic facts on the ground.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. And it was, really, really wonderful to hear about some of the work and behind the scenes things that we don't see, right, when we're reading the graphic novel, to know about how your process, right, of creating your art. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to transition over to some folks for the YURI Education Project. And so, in addition to the graphic novel itself, to accompany the book, right, that there's curriculum that has been written for it. So I want to introduce the folks who helped put this together. So the YURI Education Project was founded in 2019 by veteran teachers Frida Lynn and Kath Goulding. YURI Education Project creates educational resources and experiences for cultural institutions, teachers, and PK through 12 students. YURI helps educators tell a more complete narrative about history, aiming to build coalitions and understanding across diverse communities. And so I'm going to actually go ahead and hand it over to them.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. Just give us a second to set this up.
Yes, thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. And we're very excited to be here. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to hear to talk about the new educator's guide that we've been working on for We Hereby Refuse. Next slide. Thanks. So we are YURI Education Project, and we were founded in 2019. And we design educational resources, one of which you'll hear about today on Asian American history and stories. And in consultation with the Kochiyama family, we were very excited to be able to name our project after a big hero of ours, civil rights activist Yuri Kochiyama, who is pictured on the slide. Next slide. And I'm Frida Lynn, and I'm one of the co-founders. I'm in San Francisco right now, and I've been a middle school and high school history teacher in the Chicago area and the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was also the education program director of the Fred T. Korematsu Institute. And here's Kath.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kath. I'm based in Queens, New York, but I am a fourth generation Los Angelino, Yonsei, and also a former public school teacher. I taught English language arts for 7 years in the East San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay. Yeah, and just also to highlight why we started YURI Education Project is that, we found that as teachers, there was such a dearth of Asian American history and stories in curriculum. And we've talked about this. Actually, Kath and I met at the Tule Lake pilgrimage on the bus. And we worked with each other over many different projects. And we just kept in touch and really wanted to form an organization dedicated to bringing these stories to PK through 12 teachers. So that's who we are.
So we've been working on Asian American curriculum resources for a couple of years now, and wanted to highlight some of the available materials out there that we've worked on. We wrote and recently contributed to the PBS series, The Asian Americans, which maybe some of you in the audience, I imagine, checked out when it premiered. And we also helped write an educational guide to accompany a video game called Mission US, which was released this past year. Was that right, Frida?
Yeah.
And it's a story, one of the stories about the Japanese American incarceration, and it's for middle school learners. And we're very proud. We just finished writing some materials to accompany a documentary called Amy Tan, Unintended Memoir. And all of these materials are available for free for teachers on PBS Learning Media. So, okay, we're here today to talk about this new educator's guide to We Hereby Refuse. I was so happy to connect with Frank at a day of remembrance in New York and tell him that we started this curriculum project, and he said he needed a curriculum. So this is a quick overview of what this guide includes. It has a timeline that I know Frank will be excited to talk to you more about. It's a very beautiful timeline he's helped create with events related to the novel. It also has fully formed lesson plans. So these describe educational protocols, and it includes handouts for teachers. All the lessons are aligned with Washington, California, and National Social Studies standards. And the guide concludes with a civic action project. And the sources that Frank and the other authors drew upon to write this novel. So let's go ahead. We want to show you what it actually looks like to bring a book like We Hereby Refuse to the classrooms. We're going to explore a few of these elements in depth, not all of them. But Frida, do you want to start out talking about the timeline?
Yes. So we have a couple of timelines that are going to be in this guide, because as we know, We Hereby Refuse covers a very complicated history. And so we want to provide timelines to help educators really give this historical context to students, in a very informative and comprehensive way. So let's look at the first timeline on the next slide, which Kath mentioned, and Frank did this on the online platform Tiki-Talkie.
Not TikTok, not TikTok.
Not TikTok.
Tiki-Talkie.
Tiki-Talkie, which is a great resource to really highlight as many events and situations that have happened throughout history. And then, as you can see on this, just the screenshot, it captures all of the different characters and all the things that were going on with each character and how they overlap with the other characters' events and situations. So it's really great just to see how they all connect together. So this will be available on Tiki-Talkie, and the link will be provided in the guide. And then we'll also have a document version of this included with the entire educator's guide. That's going to be on a PDF. And I don't know if Frank wants to jump in really quick to talk about this, since he worked on this really quickly, but
just very quickly to say thanks, Kathleen, for introducing me to Tiki-Talkie, very helpful software. And when you click on these buttons online, a pop-up will appear with more narrative that I'm still working on, and then links to photographs and the actual documents that were used in the writing of the script. So it basically shows our work of the book and makes it transparent for students to go back and say, well, did that really happen? Here's the actual words.
Yeah, it's an amazing resource. And I mean, I used it to help with finding primary resources that I thought would be really helpful for students, which I'll talk about in a minute. So yeah, let's talk about the next timeline, which we are also highlighting in the guide. So this gives, a very broad history of anti-Asian exclusion in the United States. And these are just some of the events that are going to be highlighted on the timeline. And it's all as it relates to citizenship, which is of course a main theme in the graphic novel. It shows how this history of anti-Asian exclusion wasn't just to Japanese Americans, it was to all Asian immigrants. The earliest Asian immigrants of the US begins as early as 1790, as you can see on this timeline. And it just shows how full citizenship rights have historically been denied to them. And it's really great how it connects to the characters, for example, the Issei in the graphic novel that emigrated from Japan, like Jim Akutsu's father. They were denied the ability to become naturalized citizens because of laws like the Naturalization Act of 1790. And then in contrast, because of that landmark Supreme Court case, US versus Wong Kim Ark, which allowed birthright citizenship, the Nisei generation were able to have full citizenship rights. So it kind of just shows you that sort of context in the educator's guide. Next slide. Yeah, so as I was mentioning, there are primary sources that students will be able to analyze throughout the lessons with the teachers. And they just show the turning points in which events happened within the stories. Next slide. Oops. So here's one of the primary sources. It's the FBI report on Jim Akutsu's father. And this was also in the timeline of Tiki-Talkie that Frank just mentioned. And it just supplements the graphic novel, by providing more details about why the FBI arrested his father, talking about all of these Japanese relations and connections, that because he had relatives in Japan and because he was affiliated with Japanese organizations, like all this evidence that led them to wanting to arrest him, like having flashlights in their homes and binoculars and all of the, these ridiculous reasons for arresting them. So it just really shows students, where the FBI was coming from. And there's other, of course, primary resources related to the other characters, to Mitsuye and to Hiroshi. But this is just a snapshot of one of the primary sources.
So to conclude our preview of the guide today, I want to show you a more ELA, so an English language arts activity called Tableau Vivance. And this is stepping into the characters. So what exactly is a tableau vivant? A tableau vivant is a living picture in which, like frozen statues, actors arrange themselves into an opening tableau and then one at a time come to life, speak a line, and then freeze again. And you can see here how suffragists, American suffragists, use tableau in public performance to assert their right to vote. So we're inspired by these early use of political protest and art. And we are asking students to take a scene from We Hereby Refuse and create a tableau around it. So we gave students a series of options because there's so many powerful, as Frank said, dramatic scenes that can be brought to life by students. So here's a scene, of course, where Jim Akutsu's father is arrested by authorities. And we asked students to take a page from this book, and then I'm going to show you how it works. We have a little chart that they work in small groups and they pick a scene and then pick a character they want to portray and decide how they want to portray it. Are they going to do it in what order? They'll pick a powerful line to speak and then pick a movement to do with it. And then, of course, some element of costume or props really brings that to bear in the classroom. It's amazing what a small thing like, let's say, having little Nas X, let's say he's playing Jim Akutsu, and he is going to have a backpack on him or wear a football jersey. So all in all, once they arrange this and make plans, it's kind of hard to imagine, but it does involve them making a movement and freezing and speaking aloud, really practicing it. And when you see it alive in the classroom, it's quite remarkable. We were able to do it with a group of teachers in the Seattle area with the Wing Luke Museum, and even they got into it, I would say. Frank, tell me yes or no. But what we're doing here with something like this activity is asking kids to step into the inner lives of their characters. They consider with both the mind and the body their complicated dilemmas and decisions. Okay, that wraps us up for today. Thank you for giving us a few minutes here. We hope any educators who are here in the room will say hello to us in the chat and find this guide illuminating and practical. We want Hereby Refuse as part and parcel of all middle and high school curriculums, which with the push for ethnic studies, it sounds like we are on a good route forward. And we just want to say very quickly that we at YURI Education Project are offering a summer professional learning experience for teachers. It's called Teaching Asian America, Curricular Conversations for PK through 12 Spaces. And you can find more information on our website. Thank you so much, everybody. Feel free to get in touch.
Yes, please get in touch if you want to find out more about the projects that we mentioned earlier. It's all on our website. We're also on Twitter, and those are our email addresses. So yeah, we'd love to work with teachers and students. So please let us know how we can help you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Great. No, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see all of the ways in which We Hereby Refuse can be used, right? So, learning about it in the classroom, hopefully bringing, ethnic studies to a greater audience, and particularly in, middle school and high school classrooms, right? I think that's really important. So, what I want to do now, we have about a half hour left. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to pose a few questions to our panelists to get started. And if you have any questions that you are dying to ask our panelists, go ahead and throw them either into the chat or into the Q&A. And so to get our conversation and discussion started, what I want to ask the our panelists is, what was one of the moments or things that you found most personally surprising, during your research or work on this project? So I don't know if Frank, do you want to start?
Well, I'll jump right in, Kelly, and say I stick with the Tule Lake theme with this JANM audience, especially that the concrete jail that we gather around every 2 years for the Tule Lake pilgrimage is not, we discovered, after researching the directions for Matt to draw this, is not the notorious Two-Leg Stockade as described in Michi Wegland's Years of Infamy. So, we, in going through this and working with the Two-Leg Pilgrimage people, Barbara Takei, Hiroshi Shimizu, I should say, and Sharon Yamato, we went back and looked. Sharon found some photographs that Carl Meid shot at Two-Leg for her documentary that she's working on Wayne Collins. And when you zoom in on these photographs, you see the teepees that were described by Tatsuya Inoue in his Stockade Diary that he was taken to the first night after the disturbance. And these teepees were standard issue Army pyramidal tents at the time. And these were not near the concrete jail that Barbara had always assumed that the original stockade was across the road from it. No, Hiroshi Shimizu really established that it was near the camp hospital, northwest of the camp hospital, kind of below the Tri-State high school building. So this was a complete surprise in researching the geography that we needed to establish for the graphic novel to write it. And then this is now going to become part of the tours that we lead. Tamiko and I are both docents for the Two-Leg Pilgrimage. And this will be a new chapter in that tour to point out where the actual stockade was located, not where we thought it was. So big discovery, huge, did not expect that.
Oh, that's really, really great. Anyone else want to share some thoughts? Most surprising thing?
Sure. Well, for me, I came at this without nearly the knowledge of the topic that the writers did. And there was a point early on where I was reading the script, and there was this dialogue between General DeWitt and Colonel Ben Denson of the U.S., where they were talking about the necessity of camps, and the dialogue was just so over the top racist, and it was almost too on the nose. And I was thinking, this is people aren't going to buy this. So I kind of pushed back a little bit, as I like to do, Frank will say. But I just said, you need more realistic dialogue than this, but then they find the actual transcript from the dialogue in question, and that I didn't know existed, and I was just shocked at how on the nose these guys were, and so what surprised me was just. And that was very early on, how much research existed, and that I had no idea did. So. Right.
So to create a private conversation between DeWitt and Ben Denson, I knew that there were telephone transcripts recorded that they saved to basically cover their ass and deposited in National Archives, and that Roger Daniels had published in a book called The Decision to Relocate the Japanese Americans. DeWitt on this phone call says, a lot of Japs say, oh, yes, we want to go, we're good Americans, but those are the fellows I suspect the most, I should say. And Ben Denson replies, definitely. The ones giving you only lip service are the ones always to be suspected. And this is what Ross found over the top, but it's a verbatim transcript verified by the telephone transcript that they preserved.
I was especially surprised to see the wide range of resistance across the camps and across the different populations that were in camp. I think because a lot of how I came to know about resistance came through my uncle's story and knowing about my uncle's story. And I know that at times he felt shunned or ostracized or isolated by different elements of the community. And so to get a larger grasp of how widespread resistance was really meaningful for me. And I hope it will be for others who have had that similar experience, renunciants in their families, no-nos in their families, that these narratives were suppressed actively for decades. And I really hope that folks who have that experience in their backgrounds are able to read this book and achieve a deeper sense of empathy, understanding, and context for these decisions that people made under extreme circumstances. So that was very powerful to me to see just how much our community had resisted.
No, I think that's really important. And, just thinking about resistance more broadly within Asian American histories is something that I think like our students a lot of times don't think about, right? And so when I'm teaching them, like, there is a really long history of resistance, right? That is important to know, and it is hopefully empowering, right? So, I mean, hopefully, as Tamiko, you're just saying that it may be a way to like help heal some of these traumas, right? But also a way for the next generation to feel empowered by these histories of resistors, right? Yeah, absolutely. Another question that I've been wondering about is, after you've finished this project, what are some of the other things that you're working on? I know that there have been bits and pieces that have come out, in your bios and also in our conversation today, but can you all tell me a little bit about what you're working on and what we can look forward to next?
Go ahead, you guys.
Well, just in my bio, I mentioned this book about my dad and my mom. It started as a book about my dad, who grew up in LA and went to UCLA and ended up in Nebraska in the Midwest for the rest of his life because of the war. And he married a Caucasian woman, and it was just, I was always curious about his years during World War II and leading up to that, because he was a journalist as a kid in high school. He was writing for the Kashimanichi, which is a LA Japanese language newspaper, and quite outspoken. And he did all these interesting things in LA, and then the war came, and he had to completely switch gears and ended up in Nebraska, and there were whole other sets of issues there. And so it was just there was a little window in his life that that I was always curious about, and that's something I'm working on.
I worked on the exhibit text for the new exhibit, which will be opening at the San Bruno BART station, which used to be the Tanforan Assembly Center. I collaborated with Naomi Judy Shintani and a community committee as well. I worked with the Washington State Historical Society on an exhibit and curriculum and a film called Remembrance, the Legacy of Executive Order 9066. The exhibit just opened, and the film is up with the exhibit featuring my youngest Yonsei daughter. And I'm working on my own book, which is a memoir called Pilgrimage, about the importance of healing in community.
And Kelly, I think my next move may be a return to my roots in the theater. I think you and I talked about, I started out as an actor, helping start Frank Chin's Asian American Theater Workshop in San Francisco. So I've done film, academic book, graphic novel. I think that I was pleased that once we laid the foundation of a workable story and mapped out the scenario of this graphic novel, that writing the action and dialogue to go along with the drawings came fairly naturally. And so I want to pursue that, I think. And so continue developing a work possibly for the stage or screen.
No, that's all really fantastic. I mean, I think that your work is all very much grounded in things you're passionate about, right? Things that you're research, but something that's personally meaningful to you, right? And to raise awareness to these stories in whatever medium and talents that you have are really fantastic to get these stories out, right? And as I tell my students, like, many different ways of engaging in these histories and also telling these stories, and I think I see a wide range represented in what you all are doing, right? Frank, you also didn't, in your bio, you talk about how you're working on compiling camp stories, right?
Camp literature.
Sorry.
Yeah, literature before, during, and after the camps. In fact, Electra just sent me a permission form. I'm sorry she couldn't be here today, but she owed me one for a couple of months now, and her grandmother is Wakako Yamauchi. So we're including the first act of Wakako's little produced play 12-1A set in camp. And we're going to include the first scene of the first act, I should say, in the anthology, the Penguin Anthology of Camp Literature. Yeah, and the literature of Japanese American incarceration, I should say. And it'll have a different approach than will not be a greatest hits of camp literature that would have been fairly easy to do. So, as you can expect, it'll take a different, a little harder edge.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And again, drawing attention to those things that we maybe don't know enough about, right, is really, really absolutely essential. I'm not seeing any questions from the audience. So audience, if there are any questions that you have for the panelists, please go ahead and throw them in the chat or in the Q&A. I see a lot of conversation about the curriculum and the teacher's guide, and that's fantastic, right? I'm really glad to see that so many folks are excited, right, about how important it is to have this work in classrooms, right? That to bring these stories of incarceration and resistance to students of younger age. Since when I teach in college age students, a lot of my students are like, why did it take for me to be an undergrad for me to hear more about these stories of my family's histories? And so moving this, into high school and middle school, I think, and hopefully, K through 12 more broadly is absolutely essential.
And with the California state requirement, which I just saw to require ethnic studies, and in particular, a unit about Japanese American incarceration in the state requirements, I'm hoping that works like ours and others can get, into the classrooms as part of the curriculum. And I hope that Daryl Warren, that, you're retired now, but if you have friends still working, please, give them a call and let them know about this material and see if they can use it in their classrooms. And contact your, if you have students, if you're watching the students that you would wish that they would learn this in their classrooms, contact their teachers or contact the districts and get the districts engaged. Northern Michigan University has adopted our book as a, one read for their cultural diversity program. And so all the undergraduates there will have a chance to get a free copy if they want one. So if we love to see the book adopted as a one reads for Los Angeles County.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to jump in really quick to kind of respond to what you were just talking about. Like what Kelly was saying about how some people didn't learn until they were an undergrad. And I didn't learn about this until I was a teacher in Chicago. And this was in the 90s. And there was really hardly anything. All I could find was Farewell to Manzanar and teach a chapter from there. So it was really frustrating. And then Frank, in terms of what you're saying with California, yes, I'm in California, and it's very exciting that ethnic studies is here. And also exciting news that I just learned about is that Illinois officially passed a law that says all teachers need to teach a unit of Asian American history in schools, which is super exciting, which I wish was available when, again, I was there in Chicago, but here I am on the other side. I'm going to try, we really want to try and help teachers have these resources available to them.
So Frida, since we have you on the line, and we haven't talked about this yet, but are there strategies we can use to get books like ours into the California state curriculum under this new state mandate, which I'm still trying to understand more about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in touch with a lot of the ethnic studies teachers groups that are around in California, and I definitely am sharing and going to continue to share about this graphic novel and say that this is something that should be definitely recommended in their curriculum. And hopefully there's a space for, there's all this bureaucracy about like what gets written into the document that goes to teachers, but I'm going to recommend it to as many of the people as I know. I know I work with the UC Berkeley History Social Science Project, which is an affiliate of the UC Davis, the History Social Science Project. They work with educators, and they're part of the, I think they work with like the Library of Congress. And so they work with tons of history teachers. So yeah, I'll recommend it, of course, to them, and really hope that, I'm sure they'll recommend it to teachers that they talk to about this. Yeah.
Great.
Right.
We'll talk some more.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the movement towards getting more ethnic studies in middle school, high school, K through 12 is really exciting, right? It's a really exciting time to be teaching Asian American studies right now. But again, doing that work to make sure it continues spreading, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's why Kath and I are doing this workshop at the end of July, because I feel like there's the step of having the resources, and then there's the step of really teaching teachers who don't know this at all how to integrate that into their classrooms. So it's a huge feat, but it's an exciting time right now because people want it even more than ever.
Absolutely. So we do have a question in chat now. So I'm going to go ahead and post the question in chat. This is a question from Stan and says, how much impact or influence did JAs, JCL, or others have on decisions made by the government? For example, the loyalty questionnaire rollout, segregation center, or allowing or pushing renunciation?
Well, I'll take that question, I guess. To be clear, the JCL, the government was the dog and they wagged the tail, and JCL was the tail. The tail did not wag the dog. However, we show in the book a scene of Milton Eisenhower, the first director of WRA, who quit because he was just fed, could not stomach the idea, could not sleep with the idea of being this, running concentration camps on his resume. Milton Eisenhower did say, I know nothing about Japanese Americans. You, Mike Masaoka, seem like a very nice guy. Enjoyed meeting you. Would you be my liaison to the camps and help me formulate the policy for the camps? And Mike said, be sure. And we show the meeting in the graphic novel that Ross drew. And then on the interactive timeline that we're still completing, will be posted next month, I'll share the document that Mike produced a week later after that meeting, which outlines no Japanese should be taught in camps. Every effort should be to remove ethnicity and discourage the Issei from having leadership, and watch out for those Kibei because they were educated in Japan. And Stan, your question about segregation, there'll be another document from JCL where Mike outlines objects to the beatings of JCL leaders in Manzanar and Poston, which we show. And we show that as a setup to that next scene, which is Mike complaining to Dylan Meyer, my people are getting beaten up in camp. We need to segregate them, to protect them. And Mike writes a two-page memo outlining a plan for having informers in camps, that WRA would encourage informers in camps to rat out the troublemakers. We invented the line, you mean spies? And Mike says, no, not spies, not spies. But so yes, JCL did have an active role in shaping the policies of camps, but it has to be remembered that it was the government that called the shots and just used JCL as their trustees, the jail trustees, to keep the inmates in order and the cells swept.
Frank, I've always wondered.
I'm sorry. The JCL, I want to add, the JCL today, I want to emphasize, is not the same organization as the JCL of 1942. So I want to make that very clear.
I always wondered, Frank, if we knew where the directive to burn anything that had Japanese on it came from.
There was no directive. After Pearl Harbor?
Right.
Yeah, that was just fear. That was just mass hysteria.
See, I wonder, because in my dad's book, his unpublished book, right, there's something about, there's this really dramatic scene where they go and they burn their baby pictures, most things that had Japanese written on them. And I think, though I have to go and really hunt for this, I think that there was some direction or directive or something from the local JCL chapter. So I need to do some historic digging to find out if that was the case.
Sure. I mean, directive is a little strong because sure. JCL had no authority, right. But certainly guidance. They would offer advice, right. That if you do this, you'll be better off.
Right.
And as your uncle found out, I'm sorry.
Grandfather.
As Jim Akutsu found out, Jim Akutsu's father found out, by not burning the Japanese language magazine they had in their home, that was the one piece of evidence that kept him from being released from the internment camp at Missoula for 2 years after the others got out. So you should definitely do that, Tamiko, because that's a nice piece of the feelings of the time that the Issei had to go through with rumors and misinformation.
Right. And I always thought that everything got destroyed, which is so fascinating. But it turns out that there were a few things that my grandfather and my grandmother did not destroy, which included their life insurance papers, their passports, which I still have now, and one baby picture, which got left with some family friends of my oldest auntie and a Girls' Day doll set. So I have that picture, and I have, it's the one family baby picture left, and some of the doll set, thanks to my Auntie Sadako, who's on the call. But, there's, which I also consider this form of resistance, right? They didn't, follow whatever directions they were given to the letter. They did keep some things somehow.
And in camp, I can't remember now which story it was, if we got from Duncan Williams or from Sadako, of the Buddhist shrine that was hidden inside a cane, a bamboo cane that was, I know we wanted to get it in the story, we just couldn't fit it in.
There were scripture, yes. Sutras, right?
Yes.
Sutras, yeah. They, when they were doing the barrack to barrack searches.
Yes.
Right, and my Auntie Sadako remembers a military person's, what are these? They had, Japanese writings on them, and they just said they're Buddhist scriptures, or they're sutras, and they got left alone.
Yeah, so there was that element, and we want to combine that with, I think Duncan Williams had a story about Buddhists who concealed a tiny little obutsudan inside of a cane or a stick of some kind that was kept concealed from the authorities, because the WRA and JACL discouraged Buddhism, Shinto, encouraged Christianity.
Right. I always thought it was really poignant that when I always remember the part about the burning of the pictures, but not remember who told them to do that. And when I went back to my dad's book again, after not looking at it for a long time, he says that it was the local chapter of the JCL, which made me just think, it's one thing to be, told to, suppress things and to burn your history and your connections, your heritage. It's another thing to be told that by your own people. And I hope that that's something that people also take away from the larger story of camp in this book.
And Ross has mentioned his own father. Ross mentioned to me his father had written an article, I guess, in the Kashimanichi, critical of JCL's, who are these guys?
Who put them in charge?
Who put them in charge? Yeah. Right, Ross?
Yeah. No, he, and that was something my brother discovered just in the last couple of years. He went to the archives of the Kashimanichi, and my dad was mostly a sports writer, but actually in that archive is where he found this, which was his for his byline. There was this little stylized caricature of my dad, which is great. But he also could be very outspoken about the JACL and how they were more interested in golfing than they were in taking care of their people. So.
Yeah, and Tamiko, I'm sorry. Yeah, like what you were mentioning about hoping that everyone understands this larger idea of like what you're all talking about. I feel like there's like a huge parallel of this story to, internalize racism within the Asian American community in general, and just how there's a whole history of that too. I know I did that as growing up, that I didn't want to be seen as too Asian in my largely white community in suburbs. And so I can definitely see so many different connections with this graphic novel and ways we can bring this into the classroom. So I just really appreciate these really incredible personal stories that you're all sharing.
Thank you.
Well, I think with that, maybe it's a really great place to wrap up our program for today. I want to thank all the panelists again, and I'm going to hand it back over to Joy to close us out.
Thank you, Kelly, for your great job.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kelly. I hope everyone at home is joining me in a huge round of applause for all of our speakers today. It has really been such an informative, enlightening, interesting, just wonderful conversation with you all. And I'm really grateful for all of you speakers and also all of the folks who joined us today. And I just want to remind you that you can get the book from the Janum bookstore still. So please go now and purchase that. We have limited copies at the moment, but we'll have more in the future. So if we do sell out, given the high popularity, there will be more coming in. So please just keep checking out the website. And there's been a lot of wonderful links also dropped in the chat. So please check those out. And I'll leave the call open for a few minutes so folks can take a look at those. But yes, thank you so much. I hope to see you at an upcoming program. We have one coming up next week, actually with Soji Kashiwagi, who is mentioned many times throughout the program. On Tuesday, one of our NEMA Voices Discover Nikkei conversations, which Tamiko also has been a part of. So I'll put that in the chat, but at janm.org/events, please go check that out. And with that, I'm going to end this program. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And please read the book and of course, let our authors know what you think. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Tamiko, Ross, Frida, Kathleen.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.